You're watching Biography of the Millennium on A&E. He was banished from Germany, expelled from France and Belgium. He died without any idea that he had unleashed a movement that would sweep across the world. Karl Marx, champion of the underclass and the father of communism.
Karl Marx has trouble making it in the top 10, in my opinion, because his theories were consigned, to use a phrase of his, to the ash heap of history. A millennium from now will have forgotten about him.
There's no doubt that Karl Marx, as a thinker, as a social analyst, is certainly among the most influential figures of the last century. Whether you like it or not, the perversion of his thought led to millions and millions of deaths. But when you talk about importance, you're not talking only about milk and honey.
Karl Marx was a German scholar and editor. He barely earned enough to support his family, and 3 of his 6 children died in childhood. To him, the world was unjust and ruled by the capitalist upper class. Workers work and the bosses get rich. Marx believed the working class would one day rise up to take their fair share. He hoped they would create a utopian society in which money would be equally divided and no one would be hungry or ignorant. In the mid-19th century, Marx's ideas were revolutionary. His 2 groundbreaking works were the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital, co-written with Friedrich Engels.
No one ever read his epic work, Das Kapital. It's unreadable and dense, and it's an economic theory which doesn't apply to the world today and barely applied when he wrote it. But he hit the mood that came after the revolutions of 1848 perfectly with his one phrase, "Workers of the world unite." There's something more important than what nation you're part of, and that is your class. Workers are being oppressed similarly everywhere. And this simple idea took hold, and the international movements were formed.
It would be nearly 70 years before Marx's theories actually took root, adapted by leaders like Vladimir Lenin in his 1917 Bolshevik Revolution. Communism spread across the Eastern Bloc from the newly formed Soviet Union, setting the stage for the most enduring conflict of the 20th century, the Cold War. At its peak, 1 billion people lived under communism, more than any other political system in history. But with the fall of the Soviet Union in 1989 and the collapse of communist regimes throughout Europe, Marx's vision of a worldwide workers' revolution now seems at best a utopian ideal that went wrong, and at worst, an abject failure.
If you analyze the great revolutions, which were primarily Russia and China, a few others, you can see that they never were true Marxists. In the end, communism was a real dictatorship theory, not an economic theory, and it failed because the economic part of it was completely wrong.
Well, it's very easy to dismiss Marx wholesale because of the slaughter that took place in his name. His analysis of relations between workers and owners, his analysis of many things, was in fact very often a work of genius. Marx is part of us, whether we like it or not.
Christopher Columbus deserves to be on the list because he opened up the Americas and created the world that we know. He's controversial because of the introduction of slavery into the Americas, the decimation of the Native American populations can be traced to Columbus.
Christopher Columbus, Italian navigator, discoverer of the New World. Few people on our list are quite so controversial. For his is a story of courage and a series of blunders. Columbus believed the world was almost all land. He headed the wrong way, miscalculated by 8,000 miles, and ended up in the wrong location. And yet his magnificent discovery would transform our planet. By the mid-15th century, when the Ottoman Empire closed off access to the riches of Asia, Columbus speculated that the Orient could be reached by sailing not east at all, but west.
He's a mystic, you know. He's sort of half genius, half crackpot. I mean, he believes, of course, he's finding the East, not the West. He's finding the Indies.
At the time, most mariners believed the Earth was much smaller than it actually is. Yet they were certain that Columbus's plan would end in disaster. After 6 years, Columbus finally persuaded Spain's King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella to finance his journey. Columbus set off in 1492 on the first of 4 voyages west. He would sight virtually every island of the Caribbean, travel along Central America, and be credited as the first Westerner to lay eyes on the South American continent. He was also the advance guard for the creation of a mighty Spanish empire that would dominate the New World for more than a century.
Columbus spread the culture of Europe to the Americas. He didn't discover America, but part of the theme of this millennium is the growing influence of European culture around the world, and Columbus is one of the most important players in that process.
America was extraordinarily important to Europe because it created a sense of openness, of growth, of opportunity, which led to an extraordinary explosion of energy. And as Europeans conquered larger and larger areas, it led to a sense of confidence, which became one of the hallmarks of European civilization.
While Europeans benefited from the opening of the New World, those who lived there paid a terrible price. Within 4 years of Columbus's arrival in the Caribbean, his men had killed or enslaved 1/3 of the native Taíno Indians on the island of Hispaniola. Columbus's Spanish patrons were delighted with the new lands he conquered, but uneasy with the many reports of brutality against the natives.
When he gets to the New World, Spanish crown is rather upset about the way he behaves. So as an angel of good and an angel of horror, it's all him.
In the century of Spanish dominion after Columbus, millions of New World natives would be slaughtered or die of disease brought by their conquerors, and the slave trade would usher in centuries of misery and humiliation. Yet, if this millennium is marked by the rise of European civilization, then we must credit Columbus as its catalyst. Misguided, perhaps, but brave nevertheless, carrying the flag into the unknown.
Let's look real quickly. We're just checking our list. Joan of Arc, please, no smoking. Bill Gates, raise your right hand, your other right hand. Sigmund Freud, if it's not one thing, it's your mother. Karl Marx, you can always be a Marxist. Don't be afraid to say communism fell, and now the Iron Curtain is a drape.